Ordinary people kept money in banks or bought bonds. The stock market was a closed club for the elite. But Mitchell saw huge opportunity in this. Every American should be a capitalist, he said. Why should wealth belong only to the wealthy? In 1920, Mitchell created a subsidiary company, National City Company. Its task was simple: sell stocks to ordinary Americans right in bank branches. When a person came to open a savings account, they were offered to invest in the American dream. Mitchell turned stock selling into an art. He studied every detail: sales psychology, human greed, the dreams of ordinary Americans. His salespeople were placed in 69 bank branches across the country. They weren't boring bankers. These were real dream merchants, trained according to Mitchell's special program. The advertising was revolutionary for its time. Ads appeared in newspapers. Get rich by investing just $15 a month. Become a partner of American Telephone and Telegraph. Your children will be proud of you. You're an investor. Magazines published success stories. How a secretary from Ohio became rich in 2 years. Streetcar driver bought his own house with dividends. Salespeople used clever tricks. They told clients, "Mr. Johnson, you don't want to work for someone else your whole life, do you? General Electric stocks. This is your chance to become master of your own destiny." Or, "Mrs. Smith, your husband works for Ford. Why don't you become a co-owner of the company?" National City Company offices were decorated with posters showing happy families against the backdrop of big houses. Thanks to stocks, we bought our dream home. Happy faces, expensive cars, smiling children, everything screamed, this could be your life. But the real genius was in the credit scheme. Stocks could be bought on margin. Put down only 10% of your own money, borrow the rest from the bank. Imagine, you have $100, you buy $1,000 worth of stocks. If they grow by 20%, you earn $200. Double your money. Salespeople demonstrated this with simple examples. Look, Mr. Brown bought Radio Corporation stocks for $500, investing only $50. In 6 months, they grew by $150. His profit? 300%. And your money in the bank would have brought only $15. The result exceeded all expectations. From 1925 to 1929, the volume of loans for stock purchases grew from $2 to $8.5 billion, a 425% increase in 4 years. The number of Americans owning stocks grew from 500,000 to 10 million people. A teacher from Ohio mortgaged her house for Radio Corporation stocks. A farmer from Kansas sold his cattle to buy General Motors papers. A mechanic from Detroit invested 6 months' salary in Ford stocks. Everyone believed this was their chance to get rich, and Mitchell basked in the glory. He was called a financial genius and a democratizer of Wall Street. In 1928, he earned $1.2 million. In today's money, that's $20 million. Magazines wrote about him as the man who made every American a potential millionaire. But Mitchell went further. He created investment trusts, funds that bought stocks with borrowed money. These trusts themselves became joint stock companies whose stocks were again bought on credit. The result was a pyramid of debts built on the hope that prices would rise forever. By spring 1929, even the most optimistic economists began to worry. Stock prices were rising faster than the economy. The Federal Reserve System sounded the alarm. The market was overheated. The numbers were frightening. Major company stocks were trading at prices 15 times their annual profit. For comparison, today such a ratio is considered a sign of a speculative bubble. On February 6, 1929, the Federal Reserve System issued a warning to banks. Stop issuing loans for speculation in the stock market. The central bank demanded limiting margin lending. The market's reaction was immediate. In March, stocks began to fall. In a few days, Americans lost billions. Panic was growing. It seemed the bubble had burst. And then on March 12, 1929, Charles Mitchell made a decision that changed the course of history. He called a press conference and spoke words that will go down in history. National City Bank will provide the market with all the liquidity it needs. We will not allow an unnecessary crisis to occur. The effect was immediate. Newspapers came out with headlines. Sunshine Charlie saves the market. Stocks bounced back. In 1 week, the market recovered all losses and went to new records. After Mitchell's statement, the market entered the final phase of madness. In the summer of 1929, stocks reached historic highs. The Dow Jones Index rose to 381 points, a record that wouldn't be beaten for the next 25 years. 3 million new Americans entered the market in the last months before the crash. Wives secretly pawned jewelry to buy stocks. Shoe shiners gave investment advice. Even children spent pocket money on papers. Those who entered the market earlier felt like geniuses. Simple clerks became millionaires on paper. Chauffeurs bought mansions, secretaries, fur coats. America was intoxicated with the illusion of endless wealth. But behind the facade of prosperity lurked the mathematics of catastrophe. Every dollar invested in stocks was backed by only 10 cents of real money. With a 10% price drop, the margin investor lost everything. With a 50% drop, they owed the bank more than they earned in a year. By the fall of 1929, smart money began to get nervous. Large institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, banks saw warning signs that escaped the attention of ordinary people. First, economic indicators were deteriorating. Industrial production slowed, car sales fell, new home construction decreased, but stocks continued to rise, ignoring reality. The gap between the stock market and the economy became critical. Second, smart investors understood the mathematics of margin trading better than others. They saw when 90% of money in the market was borrowed funds, any decline would turn into catastrophe. Joseph Kennedy, father of the future president, later recounted, "When the shoe shiner started giving me stock advice, I knew it was time to sell." Third, insiders knew about Federal Reserve System plans. The central bank was preparing to raise interest rates, which would make margin loans more expensive and could trigger mass selling. Large players began quietly taking profits. They sold in small portions so as not to crash the market prematurely. But by October, patience ran out. Some banks received insider information that the Bank of England planned to raise rates, which would automatically force the Fed to follow suit. On the morning of October 24, 1929, New York's largest investment funds made a coordinated decision: time to exit. They began selling in large blocks, hundreds of thousands of shares simultaneously. Prices crawled down, first slowly, then in an avalanche. By noon, panic began. In one day, they sold a record 13 million shares, 5 times more than usual. Brokers couldn't process orders. The telephone system couldn't handle the load. The domino effect that Mitchell had unwittingly created with his system was launched. First domino, falling prices forced banks to demand additional contributions from margin investors. Second domino, people had no money for additional payments. They were forced to sell stocks, which further crashed prices. Third domino, falling prices made stocks unsuitable as collateral for new loans. Banks stopped lending, which deprived the market of liquidity. Fourth domino, banks that had issued too many margin loans began to go bankrupt. The first to fall were those who followed Mitchell's example. October 29th, Black Tuesday, the final crash. In one day, Americans lost $14 billion, more than the U.S. spent on the entire World War I. Behind the dry numbers hid human tragedies. Edward Hopkins, a mechanic from Detroit, bought Ford stocks for $5,000. His life savings. By November, they were worth $200, and the bank demanded an additional $3,000. Hopkins hanged himself in his garage. Mary Coalfield, a teacher from Ohio, mortgaged her parents' house to buy Radio Corporation stocks. After the crash, the bank repossessed the house. A family of 3 generations found themselves on the street. In New York, lines formed not only at banks but also on bridges. Suicides reached record levels. The Brooklyn Bridge became a symbol of despair. Those who just yesterday considered themselves millionaires ended their lives there. What about Mitchell? In 1933, he was called before Congress. Senator Carter Glass asked, "Do you consider yourself responsible for the ruin of millions of American families?" Mitchell replied, "I wanted to give people the opportunity to get rich. No one forced them to buy stocks." But justice caught up with Sunshine Charlie. In 1933, he was tried for tax evasion of $850,000. He was forced to resign in complete disgrace. The man who was called the market's savior became a symbol of greed and irresponsibility. American society was divided in its attitude towards Mitchell. Newspapers wrote about him differently. The New York Times called him the architect of financial catastrophe and the man who turned the American dream into a nightmare. Ordinary Americans hated him with all their hearts. On the streets of New York, he was booed. One Detroit newspaper wrote, "Charles Mitchell stole more from us than any bank robber in history." A robber takes a bag of money, but Mitchell took the future from an entire generation. But there were also defenders. Many businessmen said, Mitchell didn't force anyone to buy stocks. People themselves chose greed over caution. His former colleagues claimed, Charlie just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Any banker in his position would have done the same. As for National City Bank, paradoxically, the bank not only survived the crisis, but strengthened. After Mitchell's resignation, the new management shut down all risky operations, focusing on conservative deposits and loans. The bank received government support as too big to fall. Moreover, the collapse of competitors allowed National City to absorb their assets for pennies. By 1935, the bank controlled an even larger market segment than before the crisis. Mitchell himself spent the rest of his life in relative obscurity. After the trial, he moved to Europe, where he worked as a consultant for small banks. In April 1933, President Roosevelt signed an executive order that shook the foundations of the American economy. Private individuals were prohibited from owning gold. All Americans were required to surrender their gold coins and bars to the government at a fixed price. This was a desperate attempt to regain control over the monetary system. As long as people could demand gold for dollars, the government couldn't print money to fight the Depression. Gold confiscation allowed increasing the money supply and reducing deflation. But the price was violating Americans' fundamental right to own precious metals. In a month, Americans surrendered more than 3,600 tons of gold, more than the current reserves of Russia and China combined. And a year later, the government raised the official price of gold from $20 to $35 per ounce, earning billions of dollars on the confiscated metal. The scars of the Great Depression remained for generations. The American economy recovered for 10 years. Millions of people forever lost faith in the stock market. An entire generation preferred to keep money under the mattress rather than in trust banks. Today, almost a century later, history repeats with frightening accuracy. 50 million Americans trade stocks through smartphones. The volume of margin loans has reached a record $900 billion. Apps like Robinhood promise the same thing Mitchell offered. Make everyone an investor. Zero commissions. Trade like a pro. Invest your paycheck. A new generation invests in cryptocurrencies and meme stocks, borrowing money on margin accounts. Same promises of easy money, same cheap loans. The same mechanism Mitchell created almost 100 years ago. The average American today owes more than they earn in a year. Margin trading has reached 1929 levels. And again, millions of people believe that this time is different. Charles Mitchell's story is about how good intentions can lead to catastrophe. He really wanted to give ordinary people a chance to get rich, but his system turned the American dream into a nightmare for a quarter of the country's population. Every American should be a capitalist, Mitchell said in 1928. Everyone should invest